welcome to Beyond the Words. This is Zeitgeist podcast about localization, where we talk to localization and marketing professionals about their career trajectory, how they work with languages, and what they see in the future of the industry. So today we're very happy to be joined by Iryna Rogova. She has a master's in foreign languages and foreign literature from an educational institution that used to be situated in Eastern Ukraine. But she's brought her passion for learning, reading, and language in her localization work in the United States, where she has been working in the tech industry for the last 8 years. And throughout her career, she's worked as a translator, as a project and program manager for localization at companies like Tableau, the data analysis and visualization company, Mandiant, which is a cybersecurity leader, which is now part of Google, and most recently at Elastic. So joining us live from Seattle, Washington. Thanks for joining us, Iryna.
Thank you for having me. This is my first podcast.
Hopefully not the last one. So just to start off, can you tell us a little bit about how you got your start in localization, your interest in languages, what led you to this career path?
Sure. Well, my start with localization and languages, it began when I was in middle school, living in Ukraine. That's where I'm originally from. And my big sister, so I have a big sister, and she took this sort of an extra curriculum class in English. That was through like a paid subscription that we would receive, workbooks through by mail. We would pick them up at the post office, and so she would study, and then I was interested and curious about what she was doing. So that's how my whole journey with the English language began. And I was just in my early teens, and I thought that the workbooks that she had worked with looked interesting. So I would just pick them up and learn vocab and the rules and the syntax of how the language was structured. And so I actually say this: I was never good at math or any other discipline whatsoever, like associated with that. So language was kind of just an intuitive and natural way for me to go. And so that's what I chose when it was time for me to go to pick a career. I decided that I wanted to go into languages, and I always loved reading. So languages and literature, that sounded like, again, something natural for me to go towards or to go after. And that's how I got my master's in that. And that was in Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine. That institute does not exist anymore. It was closed. I think due to the COVID and then war, and so it's a shame that it doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of like part of my history was vanished, but at the same time, I'm still I'm grateful to all my amazing professors and people who I had met there. After I graduated, I moved to Kharkiv, which is like the second biggest city in Ukraine, and I could not find any work as in languages, like directly working with languages as a teacher or as a translator. So instead, what I was able to find, I got a job in customer support. So I became a customer support person with a startup that did web hosting, and it was just like an outsourced operation in Ukraine for a web hosting startup based in the United States. So that's how my language skills kind of just became relevant. And so I worked there for a little while. And then a year or so, or 2 years after that, I was lucky to move to France, Paris, France, and I lived in Paris for less than 2 years, I think. And that's where my, the rise of my French kind of just like happened for me. And I was happy about that because French was one of the languages that I had studied in college and in the institute that I went to. And it was just, it was never, there was never, before I moved to France, there was never an opportunity for me to use that language. And when I found myself in Paris, I realized I can't speak French. And so I had to, I know the, like, I know the word, I know the words, I know some vocab, but I can't speak it. And I had to just like start from scratch. I went into the city hall. They had in French, the French, they are fabulous in the way that they would give a lot of good stuff to you for free or for little money. So their language classes were super affordable and for like subsidized by the city hall. And so I went on to just like start from scratch and learn the language almost from scratch there. And it was immensely helpful. It's just like it was a dream come true to learn the language in its natural setting from like a professor who was a native French speaker with a lot of people around you who would speak French, with like all these cafes and restaurants and movie theaters that were showing you content in French. So I was lucky enough to stay there in that setting for a couple of years. And after my journey, my trip to France ended, I moved to the US. Again, it was a very lucky and fortunate move for me. I moved to the US in 2013, I believe. And again, couldn't find myself anywhere but in localization or something that would be related to localization and languages. And for the first time in my life, I became a translator. So that's that was my first job in the US. I was a translator for a company that manufactured voice recognition devices and software. So both hardware and software, I think, for like cars that would be, used in cars, or a personal assistant. Personal assistant software. And so I became a translator. That was very interesting. That was the first time I found myself, trying to kind of like get back to my native language and, make sure that I do a great job, doing it very naturally, and also taking into account the fact that it would be a voice recognition software. So it would have to speak back to the to whoever, like, to the person who would give a command in that language. The software would have to speak back in a natural way, with a natural phrase translated in that language. So it was interesting for me. I realized quickly into the job, after a few months into the job, I realized that I am a bad translator, and I don't know, I don't possess the necessary skills, I guess I'm not that kind of person. I might be a good translator with the package of like those social skills or interpersonal skills that are required to be a good translator, but I could not find myself like sitting down for hours and like just translating without some action happening around it. So I think that's what led me to believe or to consider, maybe becoming a PM in localization. I still wanted to be I still wanted to be associated with the languages and everything that has to do with like, oh, how fascinating is it to just like transform a product or a web page or a document from one language into another, and then sell it to someone in that country or whoever speaks that language. So I wanted to be associated with the languages and localization, and that's what brought me to Tableau, my first job where I was a localization PM. So let me know if you want me to stop, because I've been talking nonstop for 10 minutes.
So yes, Iryna, you mentioned Tableau, and as Amanda said in her introduction, your whole background now in project management is in the tech industry. So what led you to the tech industry, and what are the unique aspects of managing localization programs for tech companies?
Well, so when I got that job at Tableau, I was terrified because Tableau was something exciting, and also it just seemed like such a great company with such a great product, and I couldn't understand like 100%. I couldn't wrap my mind around what kind of product they do, because tech was still new to me, and all the BI like business intelligence buzz and like the context around it was so new to me. So when I interviewed for the Tableau position and I got the job, and I started working there, it was Tableau back then was still a startup, or they had a startup mentality, I guess. And the marketing team was super. It was such a hectic environment. It was like a very big room full of people who would constantly be talking across like the rows from each other, and being on the phone, or somebody would be having lunch. So it was just like as if we were running an election campaign or something. It was so chaotic, but at the same time so exciting. And I was terrified at first, because I was like, I'm not used to this. This is so noisy and cool. And what if I'm not up to what if I don't impress them like enough? And it was just a boot camp environment for me. I was thrown into okay, you got to project manage this and this for us localization wise, and this is a work queue that your work queue out of the system that you're going to be getting tickets from marketing folks and other folks, and some of them might not make sense to you, or and I was just thrown into this environment with a lot of requests and tickets coming at me from the marketing folks, and all of them were like, we need this now, we need this yesterday, we need this tomorrow. So everything was just like very fast. Everyone was moving very fast, and I was terrified of it, but I loved it. And so after I don't know, maybe like 6 to 9 months of being in that job, in that role, I realized how lucky I was, because like it was just it was just like a summer camp. It was a summer camp, and I was finally with I was finally with the people who I looked up to and I could learn from. They all spoke perfect American English, and I was probably one of the few foreigners there who had an accent, and I again could learn the perfect American English from the native speakers. I don't even have to take the classes anymore. And so it kind of combined in me like the feeling of, oh, I am not a native speaker, and I'm just like this girl from Ukraine who started at this like amazing company, and they all speak English, and I could learn from them, and I could speak English to them, and then I also can I can earn money for just like doing stuff for them, doing work for them. So um, it was another dream come true. I was very lucky and fortunate to get it, and my team was amazing. So the Tableau part of my life, it lasted for almost 6 years. I was the best, one of the best jobs I've ever had, and one of the best teams I've ever worked at. Um, and so back then, tech seemed like an exciting, booming industry and a place to be. Tech for me used to equal innovation and excitement. And now, um, I'm afraid I have to say, like, now these days, after the past couple of years, it doesn't equal innovation or excitement anymore. It doesn't. It equals, just like something stagnant, something stale, unfortunately, and not promising. Like, personally to me, and that, of course, and also something big, like something clunky, enterprise-wise. And that, of course, has to do with the things that are happening right now with the layoffs. But and also I have to say, like, some companies are just too big to innovate. If you ask me, like, if we when back in like 2015, when I was at Tableau, Tableau was still so small and so crazy that everyone was just like able to execute on the ideas and the creative things that they wanted to execute on. And a lot of campaigns, yeah, maybe some of the campaigns did not take off, marketing campaigns, or maybe some of the ideas did not take off, but we had the room to think cool, to think like exciting, and to actually execute on those things, on those thoughts and ideas. Right now, when the companies become too big, they lose that ability to innovate or execute on their cool ideas, because not because they don't want to, they want to, but they don't know how to get there, because there are so many corporate steps that you have to take in order to, like, execute on this one thing that you want to, like, or your most of your time will be spent in meetings, in one-on-ones, in all hands, in campaign weeklies, in campaign dailies, so on and so forth. And if you need to onboard a vendor or pitch an idea or do anything to innovate, automate, or anything exciting, you will grow old trying to do something, jumping through all the corporate approvals, security checks, and so on. So that's what I mean when I say some companies are just like very big. They're too big to like live an interesting life anymore.
Yeah, I think it's what a lot of companies go through this challenge. As you said, you start with a sort of startup mentality, and everything's new. You've got a great product, and then yeah, they grow so fast that sometimes they almost get ahead of themselves a bit, and then suddenly they become a giant where things are a bit more difficult to do. And I think really taking that turn is a big challenge for a lot of companies.
That's sort of what I wanted to ask about, because it was one of the things you had listed as sort of like an approach to localizing marketing campaigns in particular. You put establish a geopolitical analysis of web and digital assets in the early stages of creative and messaging process of a new campaign or offering. So what do you think that looks like in an ideal world? Like, what sort of things do the creatives who are producing these campaigns need to think about?
As a marketer, you could just also scan through your news feed and see what might pose a conflict or an issue or a concern for you and your campaign. Because when you create a campaign, it's not going to run for like 10 days starting tomorrow, right? You are planning ahead for the next quarter or for the year ahead, and you might repurpose that campaign next year. So why don't you just consider that, like, again, running a scan on the news, looking through what's happening in the world. And if you don't want to be that, to have that as part of your job, use AI tools for that, because there's so many great tools right now that can you can just craft a specific question, like and ask your favorite AI bot to with a like, make up an intro. I am a marketer, and I run and I plan to run a marketing campaign in China in this quarter of this year. What are the specific concerns I should be worried about, or what is the geopolitical situation in that region right now? And AI is one of those news kind of like news scanners, right? So it would give you some suggestions that you don't have to rely on the AI bot answers right away and say, well, this is my source of truth. No, but it could prompt you to look further, or maybe not be so concerned at all.
Yeah, and on a broader scale, I think, Iryna, it's also the cultural aspect of it as well. And I think what you're saying here is that you should probably bring the localization people a bit earlier on in the process as well, as a sort of in a consulting role. It's a sort of shift left, to take a cybersecurity kind of approach, where you bring localization people, or at least one representative of your localization people, because if you do a multilingual campaign and you bring Chinese people, French people, German people in the same room, they'll all have an opinion about your concepts, and you probably go nowhere. But at least somebody who helps you with that, it would help save a lot of problems further down the line as well, with localization based on cultural aspects. I'll give you one example. A few years ago, we worked on a campaign that was created in the UK, and it was about for IT people to get their time back. And one of the things was, one of the concepts was like a golf bag, and with golf clubs, like, because you get your time back, you can go and play golf. And that was, meant to be deployed throughout Europe. But IT folks in Germany or in France, they don't play golf that much, so it was a bit of a flop, really. And we raised the issue with the client about the very concept, and unfortunately, because we were brought in earlier on in the process, that campaign, they had spent a lot of money on it. It was it was not even stock photography. It was like a photo shoot and these sort of things. And so there's so much we could do if we were involved a bit earlier on in the process.
And it's the kind of thing where it could have been saved by, if somebody had gotten on early in the process in the same shoot, they could have just had the guy going out to get his golf clubs just do some gardening, and they probably wouldn't have had to spend that much more on the shoot. But because it's already done, they can't just pay to do it again to bring everybody out again. So I think it's useful to start earlier.
That's a very good example. Thank you for bringing that up. I could think of another one. It's just like a very short, brief example to give you. When I worked at Tableau, and I remember we had a campaign. I can't remember what the messaging of the campaign was, but the creative material, that the imagery was hands with just like a hand or both hands of someone were photographed, and one of those hands had data tattooed on the hands, on the fingers, and they wanted to deploy that imagery throughout like all the regions and languages on the website, and like in collateral, in the marketing collateral. And I think my director, who is an American but who had lived in Japan for several years, and he was he's so knowledgeable in that language. And I think it was him who pointed right away. He said, oh no, that's not going to fly with Japan. Like, it's not going to fly with Japan. They don't like tattooed anything. And so that was a big I guess a mishap. Yeah, on their part.
That's another great example.
It was another thing that you mentioned as being like an important thing to you in the way that you think about localization, the importance of accessibility for people or communities who have disabilities, for example. So how can we integrate that into the localization process?
So again, I'm like not speaking from I'm not an expert in, obviously far from being an expert in accessibility, but what I had seen and in various places that I've worked, there's still the web accessibility, a lot of people are aware of it now, which is good, but it's still not really, like, there's still so many things in the content creation process that's very old school, I should say, and it shouldn't be, because it's and when I say old school, I mean, content creation and combined with, like, okay, how do I create content and also place it on the website in a proper HTML or structure or format that wouldn't break the back structure of that page. And so a lot of people with limitations in their eyesight, they rely on certain programs to navigate web pages, right? And so if you just don't keep your website clean, HTML wise, and that's a very basic thing that you can do as a web content creator or a web page or a website builder, and that is just something that, if you are and I remember, I'm sorry, I'm rambling now, because like a lot of things are popping in my head about like what courses and like I took back in the day on the web accessibility and digital asset accessibility, and those examples were so heartbreaking, because a lot of people have some people have just like really bad eyesight, or they have eye problems, and there were examples of like, this is how a person with this and this illness can see your web content, and it would be like blurred out completely or partially, or like it's just like, it's mesmerizing, but in a bad way, to see those examples and how people can actually, they have trouble just looking at a web page sometimes. And the least thing you can do is to keep your HTML clean and properly structured for them to be able to navigate with the tool, to navigate your webpage with a specific tool built for them, and read your content. And when I think about accessibility and like content accessible for people with limitations, I don't only think about them as a minority, and they're actually the biggest minority, as it is known. I can't cite any data, but they are known as the biggest minority out there. And when you think about those people, you don't not only doing that for them, but you are also doing that for their community, for the people who are around them. And believe me, if I have a relative or a friend who has really bad eyesight, and he or she or they are complaining about a web page that they can't buy, or they like an app that they can't. So that's kind of like a long story, but also in my experience, and that was one of the things that I recently saw in my work at Elastic, was that if you were an experienced content editor, who's comfortable working in the CMS directly, that's good for you. And like you can write your blogs, you can write your articles in the blog in the CMS directly. That's good for you. But if you are still relying on tools like Google Docs or Word Docs, and you write your content there, and then you carry that content over to the CMS, a lot of bad stuff like junk inline tags will be carried over into the CMS along the lines, along the way. And so that when you pass that content over to the localization team inserts that into their TMS, and then all that junk, the inline tags and all that improper HTML gets multiplied, because like through the segmentation and in the TMS. So that gets multiplied and replicated, and then you have multiple copies of that bad HTML on your website. And that's not only bad for the, for people with disabilities, but it's also bad for the SEO, for your SEO, because Google will probably think your web page could not be trusted or not trustworthy because you have, stuff behind your content that's not up to snuff. And if you don't know how to do those things properly, there's some tools that you can talk to your web team about, and they could point you into the direction of, there's like WYSIWYG editors out there that you can use. And if you don't know HTML or don't want to learn HTML, there are WYSIWYG editors that you can use for your content, and they will properly structure the code for you, and you can just use those tools in order to keep your content clean. And that will be good for all people and teams around.
Yeah, I think that's another digital battle to be fought there, and I think it's a win-win situation when you can really make your content as clear as possible, your website structure as clear as possible, because that means that your communication is much clearer, it's less busy, and more to the point. And I think you can win a lot from that. And then from the a localization perspective as well, we know that sometimes it's when we have like space restrictions or character restrictions that we create the most powerful communications as well, because you go straight to the point. And I feel like making your interface as clear, as easy to follow as possible is a win-win, because it's better for everyone.
Right. Talk about those big giant CTAs on marketing pages where like you don't just they want you to like download a white paper, and they can't just put read this white paper or something on the CTA. Instead, they try to be very creative, not to offend anyone, but like they would put something very descriptive in the CTA. It's a CTA, just like click here to download, and that's it. You don't want to be like, here's how you can learn about blah blah blah. No, that's another content piece that like it's not a CTA. So like make your CTA concise and short.
So Iryna, going back to our first question, actually, you said that, well, your native tongue is Ukrainian, or maybe it's Russian.
It's Russian. Yeah,
it's Russian.
I was raised in a family that spoke Russian.
Okay, so Russian, presumably you speak Ukrainian as well?
Well, you know what? I obviously understand Ukrainian. I can speak Ukrainian, but without any practice now, I would probably stumble, and fumble every single sentence. So when I saw that, question that you guys put in there, about the languages, and I thought I would love to relearn my country's language, my native country language, Ukrainian, because it's a shame I was not given an opportunity to learn it. So, but I'm gonna let you ask the question first.
Oh, yeah, no. I was going through all the languages that you speak. So although maybe you need to brush up on your Ukrainian, I'm sure it's very good. And we know you speak French. Obviously, your English is native tongue level. But if there was one language that you would want to learn now, which language would it be, and why?
I don't have a language like that. I don't. I really want to. I don't want to learn any more new languages. I want to. Be able to speak the languages that are native to me. Like obviously, I speak good Russian because I was brought up in a Russian environment, in a Russian speaking environment, and my husband is Russian. So, but I would love to relearn my other native language, which is Ukrainian. And due to again due to a long history of political oppression of Ukraine by the Russian by the Russian state, and prior to what's happening now, there was this USSR thing, the Soviet Union, and the language itself, Ukrainian language itself, was oppressed for a long time. It was diminished and it was just humiliated for a long time, and that trickled down from up from the state down into like families, and the families who spoke Russian would to their kids would say, oh well, Ukrainian language is not that great, or Ukraine is not that great, because they were just brainwashed by the state for a long time that Ukraine is something not worth even mentioning, or not worth even having as a country. And so the Ukrainian language was just was not considered a language like that worth speaking for a long time. In my own family, when I grew up in Ukraine, and I grew up in an eastern part of Ukraine that had a lot of Russian speaking settlers from the Soviet Union era. And so I would love to relearn my native tongue, the Ukrainian, and I would love to be able to read books in Ukrainian again, and not look up the translation of a lot of words, because right now that's what's happening for me. I was trying to read a book in Ukrainian, and a lot of words were unfamiliar to me, and that's a shame. That's how a language gets oppressed, and then subsequently it can just vanish from the communities, from the earth, and it's not fair. It's not right. So that's the language that I would love to learn.
We'll put it down as Ukrainian. Your answer.
Film that's not in English and it's not in your native language that you can recommend.
That's a hard question, Amanda. What's your favorite film in language that other than your native language or English? Oh gosh. Well, I can't say it's my favorite film, but just recently I thought it was interesting. But I couldn't bear myself to watch it till the end because it was getting too scary for me. Recently I found out about this Mexican Spanish director who, I think her name is Isa Lopez, and she was the director who produced the latest series, the season of The True Detective, with those two women, Jodie Foster, and I think I knew the other protagonist's name because I follow her on Instagram, but I forgot. She's a part Native American part, I think, Dominican, and she's also very like bright and exceptional in my view. So the director is Issa Lopez, and she had prior to True Detective, she had filmed, or she had made a movie called Tigers Are Not Afraid, and that movie is solely in Spanish. That's just like all in Spanish. And I started watching it on YouTube the other day, and it was just, closed captions. Like I was just listening to Spanish and looking down all the time to read. But that was pretty cool, because I guess now I understand why you're asking that question, because like when you don't know the language and you can't really understand it, like you can't really hear it, like you can't understand hearing it, but like that's a whole other level of absorbing information through like this very creative process of like just looking at the image, looking at the people speaking that language you don't understand, but like it's like all the creative elements around it, like the scenery, the music, the words with the tone of voice that's being spoken. It all is very powerful. And how do you understand, how do you perceive that language through those elements? So Tigers Are Not Afraid by Issa Lopez. It's purely in Spanish, Mexican Spanish, and it's about the kids in Mexico and how they got orphaned, basically because of the gang violence in that country, in the region where they lived, and how they formed just like a street band, a street gang on their own, and how they survive life being orphaned in Mexico. So that, but I couldn't bear myself to look through it, like to watch it through there. So I don't know how, like the ending, if it's a happy ending or not so happy ending, but I'm guessing, yeah, not so happy.
So that's your favorite film for where you've seen up to a certain point.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Iryna. Thank you for joining us today, and for sharing all your insights and experience. And it was really, really fascinating to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you, Bruno, for having me on your podcast. I hope this podcast will be very, very successful, and you'll have plenty of interesting, knowledgeable, fascinating people as guests. And I'm happy to also promote it in my localization community.
And that would be great. And I hope you'll be one of our viewers and listeners in the future too.
Yeah, me too.